This music is really holy, you guys. Wow. I love it. Well, it's good to see all of you. My name is Nathan. If we haven't had the pleasure of connecting before, I'm one of our youth pastors here at the Bay. And today, y'all, is going to be a lot of fun. You got a little notebook on your way in and a pen. And this is going to be a great message to write down some notes, okay? Because we're actually going to be moving at a pretty fun pace here. Last week, our lead pastor, John, shared an amazing message at this campus about Barnabas. And while he was doing that, our Brentwood campus, Spanish campus, and Concord campus were hearing a portion of the book of Luke chapter 9 that I don't want you guys to miss. So we're going to hit some highlights from that passage today and then go into the rest of the passage that our other campuses are hearing today as well. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And then at the end of our teaching time today, we're also going to have an opportunity for reflection, and that notebook is going to come in really handy. So without any further ado, let's hop into it. A few years ago, there was a street vendor in New York City who was selling some spray paint art. You guys may have seen stuff like this. You know, you go downtown in the city, you see stuff like this. There was a guy selling this stuff out in Central Park, selling these pieces for like $60 each, and people are walking by. They're not really buying very many. The guy in the booth is there for 7 hours, only sells 8 paintings. You can see there's at least a couple dozen there. And one lady's coming by trying to haggle, like gets a 50% discount on one of these paintings because she doesn't really think it's worth the $60. Well, funny thing is, the tens of thousands of people who walked by and didn't buy a painting are kicking themselves, because it turns out these were signed originals from famous street artist Banksy. One of his pieces recently sold for $250,000 at auction. And tens of thousands of people walked by life-changing money because they didn't know who the artist was. His identity made all the difference for what his art was worth. And similarly, thousands of people in Pleasanton are going to drive by churches just like ours. And when they think of Jesus, they're going to think about $60 art. For whatever reason. Maybe for them, they just are a skeptic. They don't have really much of a basis for believing in anything about faith or God. Maybe they've been hurt by the church. And when they hear Jesus and church, they're thinking rules and all the stuff that hurt me in my background. But for whatever reason, there are thousands of people in our community and millions of people around the world who, when they think of Jesus, they don't see something of great value. They're missing out on the value of what Jesus is because they don't understand his identity. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to begin in Luke chapter 9, verses 18 through 26. It says, "Once when Jesus was praying in private and his disciples were with him, he asked them, 'Who do the crowds say I am?' They replied, 'Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others that one of the prophets of long ago has come back to life.' But catch, this is the most important verse in this part right here. 'But what about you?' he asked. 'Who do you say I am?' Peter answered, 'You are God's Messiah. You are the anointed one. You're the Savior. You are the Messiah.'" And here's the one thing I want you guys to write down from this passage. You got to understand this. You got to keep it in your brain and never forget it. What I believe about Jesus will not change your life. What I believe about Jesus will not change your life. We have amazing pastors here at the Bay Church, and I want to tell you, we're all really convinced about this Jesus thing. But what we believe about Jesus will not change your life. What you believe about Jesus is, quite frankly, the most important thing about you. And what about the friends, the people that you live next to, your family, your neighbors? What they believe about Jesus is the difference between now and eternity. It's everything. What we believe about Jesus is the most important thing about us. And I want to tell you, sometimes we get a false image of who Jesus is. There's like a million different knockoff versions of Jesus, just the cute little Jesus we can put in our pocket, bring out when we need something, bring out when we want to act nice, bring out when we want to throw a long shot prayer. But sometimes we don't have like a real full image of Jesus. And I just want to let you guys know, it's not going to be worthwhile to Follow a Jesus that changes our morality, but not our eternity. Jesus is everything. A full image of Jesus is the difference. Jesus then continues. It says that he strictly warned them not to tell this to anyone. Let's just pause there for a second. Why? Because you and I look around, we read the Bible, we're like, go tell it on the mountain. Oh, like that, our whole job is to go tell people that Jesus is the Messiah. But Jesus is telling his actual disciples, hey, that thing about me being the Messiah, you're right. Don't tell anyone. What is going on? Well, I think this next part gives us some clarity. He says, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the teachers of the law. He must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. See, Jesus knows something that they don't. He knows his trajectory. He knows where he's going. He knows his purpose, his mission, and he doesn't try to avoid it. In fact, it's not that Jesus is trying to escape dying or persecution. He's actually trying to fulfill it, but just in the right time. And he knows if his followers start blabbing to everyone, hey, this guy says he's the Messiah, he's not going to make it to Jerusalem. He's going to get stoned to death in some backwater village. Jesus has to be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the teachers of the law to fulfill prophecy. Jesus knows exactly the way in which he has to die. And part of me, just like the literary part of me, is like, hey, Luke, this is chapter 9, and you just blew the ending. Not great for the suspense part of this story, but Jesus knows his purpose, and he doesn't try to avoid it. He doesn't try to avoid the fact that death is part of the plan and part of the mission. And this is obviously, for me as a person who believes in Jesus, follows Jesus, is in awe of his love for me, that he would do this for me. I want to respect that, but I also see in what we're about to read that Jesus was not just showing us the thing he would do, he's showing us the thing that we will do. He says in verse 23, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self? It makes me think of, I have 3 little toddlers and they're always trying to grab snacks. It's like the thing where you put your hand in the jar and like the more jelly beans you try to grab, you can't get your hand out of the jar. The more you try to grasp, the more you try to hold on to, the less you ever actually have. And you just got to let go of everything and pull your hand out of the jar and dump it into your mouth like a freak. That's just me. Never mind. Now, we have to be willing to recognize that this is not just something Jesus did for us. It's also something that Jesus calls us to do for him. See, just like in that story I told at the beginning where people were bartering with the artist about how much to pay for something, they're looking at priceless art and they're haggling over $60. And I wonder if sometimes we do that with Jesus. Man, he gave us everything. And we're like, yeah, but Jesus, do I really have to practice the Sabbath? But Jesus, do I really have to tithe 10%? Jesus, do I really need to forgive my neighbors when they do something to me? Because it's a lot more effective to just be kind of mean back to them. Can we stop bartering with God? I think this is just a question I wrestle with because I do this all the time. God, how little can I pay for what you've done for me? But Jesus is pretty blunt in this passage. We're trying to live a costless Christianity. And friends, a Christianity that costs me nothing is worth nothing. So what good is it in verse 25? What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self? Where our culture would actually say it's pretty good. That's kind of the American dream, is the white picket fence and the house and the 2-car garage. And it used to be a golden retriever. It's probably a Labradoodle now. But I think that the point is we're very content in our culture to chase after comfort and financial stability and all those things. Those aren't bad things, but when they become the end in itself, when Jesus becomes the way we fulfill our other dreams and aspirations, We have a wrong picture of Jesus, and we're searching after the wrong stuff. When we're saying, how much of my Christianity can I leave behind and still get to heaven so that I can enjoy earthly comfort? We're missing it. We're missing it. And this last part, man, Jesus does not mince words. In verse 26, he says, whoever is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his glory and in the glory of the Father and the holy angels. We talk a lot about having a personal relationship with Jesus, and that is absolutely necessary. It's about what I've believed in Jesus that gives my eternity a trajectory that meets with God. But sometimes when we talk about a personal relationship, it becomes a private relationship, a relationship behind closed doors because I don't want to offend someone or say the wrong thing, or God forbid I say Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. That message doesn't sell very well in 2025. But friends, a private faith cannot save the world, and a private faith doesn't save us. If I live my faith in private because I'm just ashamed of the fact that I really do believe that Jesus is the only way, if I keep that to myself because I'm afraid of maybe offending someone by letting them know that God actually does love them, he wants a relationship with them, and that he's the only option, if I keep that to myself because I'm ashamed of the truth and I'm ashamed of my Jesus, this is what he says. He says that he will be ashamed of us. Depart from me. I never knew you. Yeah, so this first half is really heavy. And this is why I wanted us to take some time. Let's write down some notes, because there's stuff here that it's kind of like when something slowly sinks into a lake until it rests on the bottom. Like, there's just so many pieces of this message that hit and then hit and then hit and then hit, and we need some time for that to settle in. See, I just want to do a quick test of the room. I want to test our theology. I want to make sure Pastor Apollo has been treating you guys well. See, this whole thing about, man, is this a private faith, a thing I keep to myself or something I share? Real quick, I want you guys to point, who are the people in the room who are responsible for making disciples? Real quick, just everyone in the hand, take your finger and point. Who are the people in the room who are responsible for making disciples? That's right, your finger should be going either here or there or there. The answer is everybody. That's everybody's job. It's everyone's job. It's not just the pastor's job. See, you guys have something that your pastors don't have. You want to know what it is? Coworkers who don't know Jesus. At least I hope so. I'm pretty sure none of the pastors on our staff are unsaved. We can check, but you guys actually have a lot of people in your life. You spend 40, 50, 60 hours a week with people that don't know Jesus. And yet sometimes we're so afraid of saying just the wrong thing or offending the wrong way, or we don't want our coworkers to be ashamed of us when we talk about Jesus. But Jesus says, hey, actually, I'm going to be ashamed of you if you never talk about it. If you're too ashamed to speak about it, this is a big deal. And honestly, I want you guys even maybe to think of it like this. Anybody in here ever try to set up two friends together, like play matchmaker a little bit? You guys have probably recognized by now, but you can't make them fall in love, but you can at least introduce them to each other. And I think sometimes that's kind of our job. I can't make somebody love Jesus. I can't crawl into their heart and force love, but I can introduce them. Both through my interactions with them, my love for them, the words that I share, the presence I bring into our relationship. But also, man, it's a really easy win to say, hey, you want to go to church with me and then grab lunch afterwards? I know that feels a little bit intimidating, but there's some honestly discouraging statistics out there. In the United States church, on average, I bet the Bay Church Pleasanton is better at this than most, but on average, you want to know what percentage of Christians invite a friend to church in a given year? 2%. Whew. 2% of people bring somebody with them to church in a year. And not just bring, invite. It's one thing to you invite everybody and they just, I'm sorry, I'm maybe all of your friends play in the NFL, so you can't bring them to church with you on a Sunday. But you want to know the thing? When people who don't go to church were interviewed, 80% said that if they were personally invited by someone they knew, they would go, especially if they went out for lunch afterward. And so maybe that's just one really practical step of saying, Jesus, I want to break out of that part of me that's afraid. that's hesitant, that's anxious, that's nervous. Jesus, I want to break out of the part of me that sees faith as a thing to only be done in a sanctuary or only be done in my prayer closet behind closed doors. Our faith is a faith that needs to change the world because the world desperately needs Jesus. Come on. So I think if you're like me, sometimes you ask the question though, like, why couldn't Jesus have made it a little easier? You know, like, it's a lot of pressure to know that there are hundreds of people in my circle of influence that I might be the only Christian that has an opportunity to share the gospel with them. That's a lot of pressure, Jesus. Why couldn't you have made it easier, like done something really crazy to make it really apparent that you were God or whatever? He did rise from the dead, so that's something. But we have to remember, you guys, there were a lot of people that saw every miracle Jesus did and still didn't believe. There were people that watched everything he did, followed him around for years, saw the miracles, saw him raising people from the dead, saw him forgiving sins, and wanted to crucify him for it. See, often we want for it to be see to believe. But what this passage and others are trying to help us see is actually sometimes it's the inverse. We have to believe to see. We think, oh, God, if I just see, then I'll believe. But sometimes we have to believe to see. There's a picture, back in the 90s, there was these really cool things you'd see in every like dentist's office and sometimes in the line at the DMV. They're called Magic Eye. And if you look at it just the right way, there's an image that is there. It's like the real image that's beneath it all. And if you like squint your eyes just the right way, cross them a little bit, you see something pop out of the page. Does anybody see what the hidden image is in this one? What do you see? That's right. There's actually, if you see it just right, you're going to, 3 dimensions, it's going to pop out at you as Jesus on the cross. And half the people in this room are like, I don't see it. Raise your hand if you're in the room and you're like, all I see is something that looks like an ugly carpet. Maybe a bag of green coffee beans. I don't know. Gravel? I don't know. It's something. Clams. It's just a whole bunch of clams laying on the beach. The point is, there really is something here. I promise you, there's like a few people in the room who are seeing this and like, wow, that's Jesus. And a lot of us don't get it. A lot of us are looking. And if we just move past it, if we say, I just don't got the time to really dwell on this, I don't have the time to think about this, honestly, it hurts my eyes a little bit, so I'm going to call it quits. I feel you. I've been there. But sometimes we have to believe to see. If you don't even believe what I'm saying, if I was pranking you and this was actually just a picture of gravel, that'd be really mean. I promise it's not. You have to believe first and foremost that there's something worth seeing in this picture to take some time to actually lean in and try to see it. But I bet if on the right screen, on the right size, maybe printed in the book, whatever it is, if you encountered this picture in the right way, spent enough time, you leaned in, you would see what I'm seeing. Jesus hanging on the cross. And I think the same thing is true for the story of Jesus. We want to see to believe, but sometimes we have to believe to see. John 11:40 says this. It says, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? If you believe, you will see. Peter believes. He believes, he understands who the Messiah is. And now he will see. This is where the passage gets a little crazy, okay? I hope you guys are ready. Luke 9:28 through 36. We're going to read this out. It says, about 8 days after Jesus had this conversation with them, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up onto a mountain to pray. You'll notice both of these passages begin with Jesus praying. That's not a coincidence. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. 2 men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor, talking with Jesus. They spoke about his departure, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. Peter and his companions were very sleepy. There was actually 7 of them, sleepy, grumpy. But when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men standing with him. As the men were leaving Jesus, Peter said to him, Master, it's good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. He did not know what he was saying. While he was speaking, a cloud appeared and covered them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. A voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. The disciples kept this to themselves and did not tell anyone at that time what they had seen. Man, this is a wild passage. We're going to take this piece by piece, beginning with that first chunk that starts in verse 28. A few things I notice here. Jesus prays a lot. If you look throughout the Gospels, especially in Luke, you see that time and time again, when something crazy is about to go down, where's Jesus? He's praying. He's spending time in communion with the Father. One of our pastors, actually a few of them, say, much prayer, much power. Little prayer, little power. And I think that's super true. It says in verse 29, as he was praying, the appearance of his face changed. This is not from the Greek. This is just a thought. Have you ever looked at someone and they just look really grumpy all the time? And you're like, you need to change your face. Maybe you've been that person. And friend, if you want to change your face, spend some time in prayer. I know for myself personally, the times that I am most anxious, most stressed out, most myopically looking at the stuff that's right in front of me and getting freaked out by it, I realize I haven't prayed in a while. I have not been taking time to just be with God. There's something about prayer that just zooms us out. And we are both more grounded than we've ever been. It's not like we're just floating away into heaven when we're praying, but we're grounded, but we're also not tethered by the stuff that's going on in our life in the same way. When we're spending time with God in prayer, we just, quite frankly, have access to a realm that's more than just the right here and the right now. We have access to a God who's a whole lot bigger than our problems. And the reason why we don't really lean into that as frequently is because honestly, it's a little bit less impressive and measurable than, well, what's the thing I built for God and how many hours did I serve and all the other things that are easy to put a label on. You know, prayer actually does mean trusting God with the results. I can't force his hand. And Jesus intentionally and consistently spends time in prayer. The next thing I notice here in this passage, it says that Moses and Elijah show up. Wow, it's kind of fun. It's a family reunion. They're all looking at each other hey, it's been a couple thousand years. Good to see you. Good to see you, Jesus. And it's actually really cool. Why is it that these two are the people that are showing up in this story? Well, if you look way back in the book of Exodus, let's remember the whole Bible is a unified story that leads to Jesus, okay? So way back in Exodus, as God is beginning his covenant with his people Israel, Moses goes up on a mountain, sound familiar? To meet with God. And he's actually up there. It says he was up there for 40 days and 40 nights. I hope he packed a lunch or found some goats or quail or something up there. But he was on this mountain for 40 days and 40 nights communing with God. And what about Elijah? Where does he come in? Well, Elijah in 1 Kings 19, it says that he's freaked out. He's looking around all of Israel and he feels alone. He feels like everybody, starting with the king and queen, have turned to idolatry. They're far from God, and he doesn't know what to do. He's like this crazy depressive episode. He just wants to lay under a bush in the desert and die. And God says, I have a mission for you. He tells him to go and spend 40 days and 40 nights, there it is again, walking all the way down to that same mountain that God spoke to Moses on, Mount Sinai, Mount Horeb. So Elijah climbs up the mountain, hangs out in a cave, spends the night, and that's when he has that crazy experience of, covering his face with his jacket as God passes by, and he has this encounter with God on the mountain. So now here's Jesus, God in the flesh, on a mountain for the second meeting with Elijah and Moses. I think this is really a really unique story. It says then in the next piece that Peter has a suggestion. As they're about to leave, he says, hey, do you want me to build some booths for you? There's a lot of different ideas about why he's making that suggestion. Luke feels like it's necessary to say he didn't know what he was saying. And honestly, like as I read all the different theologians and authors and writers, most of them are like, we don't know what Luke's saying. We don't know why he adds that aside for sure. There's a few different ideas. Some people suggest that maybe this is an allusion to a time where God's people wandered in the wilderness and there was what was called the Feast of Booths, where they would build these temporary shelters to remind them of how God sustained them in their wilderness journey. There are other people who suggest that, I don't know, maybe he just was thinking they're in it for the long haul. I mean, Moses was on the mountain for 40 days before. Elijah spent the night, so maybe they're going to spend a couple days here. But at the very least, it is interesting that he waits until they're about to leave. It says that as Moses and Elijah were about to leave Jesus, that's when Peter pipes in. Hey guys, it's a good thing I'm here. Want me to build a house? Let's linger in this for a little bit. And what I noticed there that's really interesting is right before that, what was Peter doing? He was asleep. He missed like the first 2/3 of this meeting while Jesus and Moses and Elijah are talking about all the good stuff. What's Peter doing? He's sleeping. And then when he wakes up, he's like, all right, now the party started. Jesus, let me take control. Let me go ahead and set up some booths. We'll hang out here for a little bit. And sometimes I wonder if that's me. I wonder if that's us. How often do we kind of sleep through a lot of what God is doing? And then like the second we wake up to it, we're like, all right, this moment that I'm experiencing, this is what needs to be preserved. And this is not a shot at my beautiful Pentecostal brothers and sisters. I'm one of them. But sometimes you can't force a revival just by building a tent. And that's kind of what it feels like Peter's doing. Like, God, I'm putting down some roots here. We're going to hang out in this moment, and I am going to have to say about the kind of spiritual encounter we had. I did my homework. I read Exodus. I read 1 Kings. I know that this lasts a couple days. It's going to be just like it was then. Here's what we're going to do. And then it's different all of a sudden, because turns out it's actually not about Peter and his experience. It's not even about Moses and his experience or Elijah and his experience, which, let's be honest, that's really crazy. Moses and Elijah are the big deal in Judaism. They represent the scriptures. They represent faithfulness to God. And they're not even the center of the story. Something bigger is going on here, and that's what we see in that next passage. It says that while Jesus was speaking, a cloud appeared, covers over them. A voice comes from the cloud, says, "This is my son who I've chosen. Listen to him." I want you to picture it just for a second, okay? You're Peter, you're James, you're John. You're watching. You see three figures: Jesus, Moses, and Elijah. Imagine it maybe in your context, okay? There's the friend you've known for a couple years, and then there's the two greatest heroes you've ever thought of in your entire life. And then a cloud covers over all three of them, and you hear a voice saying, all right, one of these three is really, really, really important and is the person to listen to from now on. And you're like, I know my friend's really cool and everything. And I know I said he was the Messiah earlier, but this is Moses and Elijah we're talking about. And if God's putting his seal of approval on one of these three, honestly, I'm not 100% sure which one it's going to be. I hope it's my friend, but Moses is a big deal, Elijah's a big deal. And then as the fog dissipates, only one of the three is left standing. And it's not Moses, and it's not Elijah, it's Jesus. See, if you were Peter, if you were a faithful Jew, the voice you've been listening to for a few thousand years is Moses. He's the law. The voice you've been listening to is that prophetic voice of Elijah who says, I'm faithful even when nobody else is. Maybe that's the voice you've been listening to. But now God is revealing, actually, it's not a replacement, it's a fulfillment. God in the flesh, Jesus, is the one who needs to be listened to. He's the new thing that God is doing, and it's time to get on board. And so, friends, I want to ask that question for each of us. What is the voice that we're listening to? What is the thing that gets the final say in our life? Just like with Moses and Elijah, there's a lot of other voices, and they're not even all bad. Moses, objectively, is going to be a really helpful person to listen to. Elijah has got a lot of great stuff to say, and God worked mightily through him. But they're no Jesus. What are the voices that we are giving authority over our lives to? And I think one of the last questions to think about here, man, just like Peter, James, and John struggled to stay awake. They were sleeping through the first half of the most important meeting that they've ever been a part of. Are you awake? Are you spiritually awake to what Jesus wants to do in your life? Are your eyes open to what God is up to? I know for me, often the answer is no. And there's a bunch of reasons. Again, there's a bunch of even good reasons. I spend so much of my free time trying to learn stuff. I'll listen to podcasts, I'll read books, that my brain is crowded with the good, sometimes at the expense of the best thing, which is being with Jesus. There's times where I'm spiritually dull to the voice of the Holy Spirit because I'm filling my brain with sermons, and sermons aren't bad. They're great. But sometimes I miss what God is doing because I'm so hurried, I'm so busy, I'm trying to do so much for God that I'm not spending time with him. So friends, are we awake? A few things for us to do to stay awake spiritually. Here's just a couple ideas for you to scribble down. I think let's stay awake through prayer. If Jesus did it, it might be a good idea for us to do it. That's a rule I like to live by. I came up with that one myself. Stay awake through Scripture. When we get to look at the story of what God has been up to in the world, it's inspiring, and it also highlights the parts of our life where God is at work. We stay awake through Scripture. We also stay awake through community. There's a reason why the Bible so frequently reminds us that being together is really valuable. It's not a take it or leave it part of the Christian journey. We were not meant to do faith by ourselves because iron sharpens iron. If there's no second iron and you're just a sword swinging around through the air, you're not going to sharpen a whole lot from the air. It's just not going to happen. We need each other. We make each other better. We point out to each other the things that we might be missing. That stuff in your life that is keeping you spiritually dull, man, that close friend that you've invited in might notice and help you come to terms with the fact that there are some things that might need to shift, some priorities that need to change. The next one, and this is touchy, okay? It is. But we stay awake through our investment. Can I just tell you, for any of you guys who are preparing for retirement or have retirement accounts, you invest money somewhere, you probably spend more time looking at the stocks that you're invested in than the stocks that you're not invested in. And spiritually, where we put our time and our money, we're going to pay a whole lot more attention to what's going on when we're actually invested. When church goes from being a place I attend sometimes on Sundays to being, this is an avenue through which I will express my gifts to serve the church and change the world. That radically changes our level of investment in God's kingdom. To see the impact that every dollar I give and every hour I serve can make on people's real lives and real eternities. The places I'm invested make a big impact on where I'm actually spending my time and my energy and paying attention. And finally, we stay awake through worship. I don't know if you guys felt it this morning, but man, during our time of worship, there was something going on other than just music. You guys sense that? Just like Jesus begins to pray and his face changes, his clothing changes, it's not that he was putting on something that wasn't already there. It's that the reality of what was fully seen. And that's what happens when we worship. It's not that the right amount of keyboard makes things holy. We're actually becoming present to a reality of God that's always there. But as we build each other up, as we're listening to this music, we're singing together, we're singing out these words about how God is worthy, how he's holy, how we need him, we rely upon him. As we do that together, we become awakened to who God is and what he wants to do in us and through us. So friends, we're going to actually end today a little bit differently than normal. I can't be the pastor who says Sometimes actually sermons and teaching and flooding our head with thoughts, sometimes that's the stuff that keeps us dull. We're not awake to God's voice because we're listening to other voices. It'd be silly for me to just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and then dismiss you. We're going to take at least a solid 5, maybe 6, 7 minutes, and we're just going to put on some music and write down some thoughts. What is God speaking to you? So up here on the screen, you're going to see some prompts. You don't have to answer specifically these prompts, but they might be helpful for you. If you're in the room and you did not get a notebook and a pen on your way in, but you'd like one, just put your hand up and one of our ushers will bring that over to you. But yeah, for the next few minutes, we're just going to journal. We're going to write down some thoughts. What is God speaking to you? I can tell you his word, but I can't force you to hear his voice. But we can at least set aside some time, set aside some opportunity to be awake to what God is doing. So for the next few minutes, spend some time in prayer. Listen for the voice of God and be brutally honest with yourself. Let's take some time.